Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.
Welcome everyone to the group chat brought to you by Overmark. I'm your host as usual. This is Darrell, and with me today I have two guests. Actually, not two guests, one co-host and another guest. Okay, Eman, what's up? Haven't heard from you in a while.
Hello. Very happy to be back here discussing the important issues that you start to face once you enroll into JC. And today we have along with us Han Jun, who's a legendary two-pointer and now studying in NUS dentistry. We're very excited to have her and to hear her opinions and her insight. So today is going to be a very nice, very interesting dialogue, and I really hope that you guys benefit from it. So Han Jun, how about you introduce yourself first?
Hi everyone, I'm Han Jun. So as what Emmanuel mentioned, I'm currently studying in NUS dentistry. Before that, I graduated from Raffles Junior College, and before that even I was from Chongqing High School, Maine.
Yep, the topic for today that we're going to discuss is, should you try a new CCA in JC? You know, you're done with O-level, you're happily entering JC. Very soon after orientation will come a point where you have to choose your CCA. So today we're really going to bring out the pros and cons and really dig out all the details on, should you try something new or should you stick to something you already know? So to give you a bit of context before we jump into this chat, for myself, I was from Catholic High. I was playing floorball. We did quite well. So when moving on to Temasek JC, I continued playing floorball. So additional point is I was also a DSA. So there's a lot more context in terms of why I had that continuity. But for Han Jun and Emmanuel, they actually tried a new CCA. So we'll really try to bring you a different perspective and for you to decide at the end of the podcast whether you should stick to it or should you jump to something new. Maybe we can start off with getting Eman, maybe you can share more about what CCA you did in secondary school and why did you choose a new CCA in JC and what was that new CCA?
Oh, okay. So actually in secondary school, I was quite a slack guy lah. I didn't really want to go for very intense CCA. So I actually joined badminton in secondary school. But then when I enrolled into JC, right, they actually had an opening for rugby lah. So a lot of my good friends actually just jailed me to just go and start trying a new sport. And it was quite intimidating at first because I'm quite small size when I first started rugby. And it's like a very aggressive, fierce sport lah. Okay, but I thought that the challenge was very exciting. So that's why I actually went to take it up. And a lot of it was influenced by my close friends. Because I knew that actually it was another outlet for me to like build stronger bonds with them and to also have a lot of fun. And then what really changed my mind was when the principal, right, of my school at the time actually showed us a little interesting statistic. So she showed like the performance, right, of the students, of those who took rigorous sport CCAs versus those who did not. And I was going to expect like that the people who didn't take any sport CCA were going to perform much better. But very interestingly, actually the history, at least for my school then, showed that the sport CCA students actually did much better for their academics. So I realized actually perhaps the reason why could be because of forced time management lah. So it was very interesting. So when I heard about this and I really wanted to like do well for A-levels, I decided, okay, I might as well force myself to cope with the challenge. And ironically, I think it really did help me with the better time management skills I had lah. So I think that is another perspective as well. From switching over from something like badminton to rugby, I had quite a bit of difficulty. There was a very steep learning curve. But I think that that's what makes the sport also more enjoyable because you are in that sense forced to like explore new boundaries lah, forced to push yourself. And generally, I think that that shaped me to always like approach challenges differently, to have fun with it. So I think that it really depends on how you see it. But I would highly suggest going for something you're still comfortable with lah. So don't do something too extreme until you cannot, like you have to completely give up certain aspects of your academic life also. So I think striking a balance is important. For me, I managed to do it because of a very strong network of support, right, that I had from my friends and my family also. So I think these factors really should weigh in into your decision making. What do you think, Han Jun? I mean, you also tried something new, right?
Yeah, I did. So my switch, right, was actually a lot more drastic. So it wasn't from a sport to a sport. It was from a performing art to a sport. So in Chongqing, I was actually in English Drama Society. Yeah, which is like purely a performing art. And then in JC, I wanted to try something very new. So I ended up in field hockey, which is quite rigorous, honestly, I might say. So I think the main rationale behind why I wanted that switch, right, was to step out of a comfort zone, which is something I think Emmanuel also mentioned. I think that between the ages of 13 to 16, right, a lot of people also have changing interests. And what you selected when you were 13 years old, when you entered secondary school, may not be something that you want to continue in JC or in the future. So I think that's the same for me. In upper sec, I was already thinking like, oh, how I wish I tried something like a sports CCA. Then at least I could get fit or something. Yeah, but I didn't have a chance to switch such when I was already so late into my secondary school years. So when the opportunity presented itself to me in JC, I thought, why not go ahead and try something new? And I think that in junior college, there is still a very safe environment for you to try something new. I think the older that you get, right, the barrier to entry actually gets higher and higher. There are a lot of clubs out there, like if you want to join a new sport, right, that will not accept newcomers. And even if I were to extrapolate it to university, right, a lot of hall CCAs and university-wide CCAs don't accept you if you don't have some form of prior experience. So in that sense, if JC is like the last stage of your life where you have a very safe environment to try something completely new, then just go ahead with it. I think you won't regret that decision.
From the conversation that we had so far, I think you're more pro for students to try something new. I don't find anything inherently wrong with that. But for myself, just to share a bit more about my background. So I was actually in primary school, I was actually a competitive swimmer. So I got so tired of seeing the T shape on the swimming pool and flipping over and going again for another lap. So I was done with swimming in primary school, even though I was doing quite okay. So when I went to secondary school, I decided to start something new. But that was in secondary school. So from there, I picked up floorball. And for myself, my story, I would say maybe not a lot of people can relate to, but it's true lah. So I just want to let all the listeners out there know what happened. So when I first started floorball in Catholic High, it was completely a new CCA because at that point in time in 2008, I think it was still a relatively new sport as compared to now. So it was completely new. There were no seniors. The CCA didn't even have a single thing. There was just a teacher in charge that started it all. But as we progressed throughout the years, obviously we were really bad because we just started. So when we went for competitions, we got trashed. And in Catholic High, the sports actually do quite well. So we were looked down upon. But we really put in so much effort from our Sec 3 to Sec 4 year. So during that year, we actually bumped up. A few of us actually managed to enter the national youth team. And from there, in our final year, when I was Sec 4, we actually won the B Division Nationals, which is like literally from zero to champion. And that was like our maiden title. And we even had to defeat like a few favorites along the way to achieve that. So for me, it was a very straightforward decision to continue down that path because I already knew I was good at floorball and I wanted to further it. So when I accepted the DSA offer to Temasek JC, obviously I had to stay in the sport. But something that I want to highlight for students out there that maybe your journey is not so similar, but you're an athlete or you're in a performing arts where you have already built that skill set, I think a major pro to not trying something new and sticking to your existing CCA is that when you enter, you already have an inherent advantage. And that brings to 2 points. So the first point is, are you looking to take up a leadership position? Because if you're learning the sport for the first time and you don't even know the rules, right, there's a good chance you can't lead your team, no matter how good you are in terms of your leadership abilities. So for myself, it was a very automatic choice that I became the captain of the team. And that opened me up to further leadership opportunities in JC, such as getting a sports scholarship. So that was a natural build-up because of what I've achieved before that. And eventually, this build-up led to a lot more build-up in university, where I went on to represent NTU and even represent Singapore for international competitions. So there's sort of this progression and there's this build-up that you will never get if you just started something new. And a second point to stick to your OCCA is that I feel that if your sport is something that is considered a competitive sport, which means I'm referring to something where there's legit competition, because of the lack of experience and the lack of skills that you might have built up, you might not exactly enjoy that experience as much. What do I mean by that? So when we go to A division, when we go to a match, we're trying to win the game, right? So if you're someone that just started, you might get benched a lot. You might not even get registered for a match. And I'm not too sure how those feelings really translate to making you happy and things like that, as compared to a seasoned player where I know I'm going to get my playing time, where I know I'm going to get my shine, especially when I train so long for it. So if you start something new, you might experience that you train for a full year and you might not even get to play in a match. And that's something that I think you should consider before you decide, okay, should I try something new or not? I think there's pros and cons to it. What's your thought on this, Eman?
I think what you mentioned was really true lah, but it really depends on each and everyone's like circumstances. So for me, I don't know. I felt that I would have certain advantage actually going for soccer. So I actually used to play competitive football also before I went to JC, but this wasn't like with school. This was with like the clubs outside. But I just didn't quite like the idea of doing the same thing again, and I didn't really know anyone in that CCA in school lah. So that's why I didn't want to go into football. But what you mentioned was really accurate though. Like there's really a very big advantage if you're very good at the sport already. And so I think that it really depends on how you look at your JC life. So if you're really trying to pursue like, let's say like the best record for CCA, you're trying to win medals, you're trying to go places with your sport, then perhaps what Darrell says is more fitting, especially if you already have experience. Yeah. So I believe that it really depends based on your circumstances lah. For me personally, I think that it doesn't really matter. Okay. My take on this is I feel that the main focus should still be academics. Then CCA is more like an outlet for you to enjoy, for you to really be happy and then like get your exercise in, get your mind right, and build some friendships lah. So I wasn't really into that competitive side of things. But looking at your angle, I think that makes a lot of sense also, especially if you want to compete in that way lah.
Okay, so maybe I'll like also add on something. I think one very important thing to consider, right, if you're trying to enter a new CCA, is whether or not what you're trying to enter is a competitive or a developmental sport. So this is more for like sports CCAs. So I think all of you also know that schools have niche sports CCAs. So if you're trying to get into a niche sports CCA with no experience, then chances are it's very difficult. And even if you do get in, right, you're competing with people who have years of experience, who might be like what Darrell said, in youth teams. And the skill level is going to be so great that you might not enjoy your time because you will always feel inferior. And if the team has enough players, you might not even make the roster for A division. Then you will start to think, oh, was the 2 years that I spent in that sport even worth it? But let's say you enter a developmental sport, which so Raffles has certain sports CCAs which are considered developmental sports, which means that the barrier to entry for it is lower because the school itself doesn't really expect you to win per se. And people that enter don't always have experience. So hockey for Raffles, for the girls team at least, was considered a developmental sport. So for my batch, almost everyone had no experience except for I think about 2 DSA players. So we were all learning together, and that's why it was also so enjoyable for me. But let's say if you're in Raffles and you want to get into swimming, which pretty much the entire team is made up of national swimmers, then I'm sorry for you, but you might have to consider these things before trying to jump into such a niche CCA.
I think I just want to add on one more point before we move on to the next point of discussion is that my own experience in Temasek JC floorball. So like I mentioned earlier, I was actually the captain, but I wouldn't say it was a very enjoyable process because with me, when I came in as a DSA were some of my friends and buddies from secondary school that we won the championship with. So we came into the school and we wanted to establish a sort of culture, a winning culture. It was not an easy thing to do because we don't have the same group of people. And in Temasek JC, the sports is not really an area of focus for the school. So they don't really invest that much resources. Pretty much all sports are considered developmental sports as per what Han Jun said. But the mentality that I had along with a lot of my other players that came from Catholic High were that we wanted to win. And we did win. But there was a very big divide between the players that just joined in JC1 compared to the experienced players and the DSAs. So it really created a gulf that was quite uncomfortable, I'll say, because for the new players, they were like, hey, I really put in the hours. I want to get the playing time. And from my perspective, I wanted them to get that playing time as well. But when push comes to shove in a competition format, it's either you win or you lose. We don't really have that margin to let you play around, and you kind of need to produce the results on court. So it was quite painful for me to have to lead such a divided team because there was such a different mentality, which is why something that I think you would want to consider, drawing back to the episode on choosing your JC, something that I mentioned was that you should go to a school where your sport that you intend to pursue is sort of like a niche. Because if the school has that sort of support structure or the quality of players that go there are on point with what your expectations are, you have a much better time. But if you're going into a school that is only developing it experientially for, like what Han Jun has said, for people to grow and to develop a new interest, there might be a very big divide. So that was something that I experienced that I wish I could do something about it, but then again, I realized that there's not much that I could have done. Okay, moving on to the next point, right? I think the difference between CCA in secondary school and in JC is that in secondary school, you get bonus CCA points because you get that -2 for your O-level L1R5 or L1R4. But you don't get the same thing in JC because your rank point is entirely dependent on A levels. So I'd just like to get both of your opinions on how important exactly is CCA in JC.
Personally, I think that if you consider the points in mind, then I would say it is not very important. But you should always have the exercise that you need lah. I really think it plays an important role in really making you feel at ease also. So you need to have something to keep you sane because the JC grind is quite crazy. So I would highly recommend a CCA, not in the aspect lah, in terms of academics or like in the future, I don't know, whatever career you might want to pursue, it won't really help you that way. But the soft skills that you pick up along the way, as well as that little outlet for you to just express yourself and ease up, is actually quite important. So not in the same sense as before, not in the academic sense. It shouldn't be something that you always spend time on to try to get that 2 points lah. There's no more 2 points to get. Yeah, and some people are quite worried about like scholarships and stuff, but I don't think that those are very essential. So I feel that there are many other things that you can do to pursue like scholarship options. So stuff like interest groups or competing in external like non-school regulated things. Those are actually better to build your portfolio also. But of course, CCA would make your application a bit better, especially if you have a leadership role lah. So if you're really gunning for certain positions in life, it could help to take a leadership role. But for the boys, this is usually dwarfed by your army lah. So if you're really looking at like leadership positions, then maybe go for them in army more aggressively. But when you're in JC, I don't really think it's that important. But I think maybe for girls it might be different. So and maybe Han Jun, you could share with us, especially with reference to like I don't know, your experience in uni also, like you said, like certain halls trying to accept you, that kind of thing. How would it actually affect your progression lah, in that sense?
Okay. I think first of all, it's definitely not important in JC, but I do think it was one of like the main highlights of my JC life. And like what Emmanuel said, I really recommend everyone to have a CCA if they can or if they feel that they're able to cope with. With regards to whether or not I think it helps for your uni applications, I think it really helps if you have a leadership position in whether or not it's a performing art, a club, or a sport. For hall, right, I think what I mentioned earlier on, having prior experience really makes a difference whether or not you're able to be accepted into a certain hall CCA. So whether or not you have a leadership position in that JC CCA, right, isn't so much like what they're looking for, whether or not you just had experience or exposure to that. I think another point that I like to bring up, right, is that JC itself already has a reputation of being a mad hustle or mug fest for 2 years straight. Everyone is like, oh, you must grind from JC1 to start all the way to the end, just grind. And that's why I think it's all the more important to have a CCA, because it balances things out and makes your JC life a lot more enjoyable. However, if you feel like you're really unable to cope and you think that your CCA is really eating into the time that you could have spent studying, especially if you feel that you're already failing or you really didn't do well for your promo exams, then yeah, don't feel bad about dropping out of your CCA or dropping certain commitments that you have. Because ultimately, what really, really matters in the end is your A-level score.
I think we are all on the same page in terms of why we think CCA is important. So for myself, I would share a bit more from the perspective of having a leadership position and how it really helped me in various sense. So during JC, because of the fact that I had a leadership position, it opened me up to more opportunities. Within JC itself, there was already a sports scholarship. So for that, I got extra pocket money every year. So that was nice. But it also, more importantly, gave me opportunities to do things that I otherwise wouldn't have. I was like the overall in charge for the student leadership camp. And then I went on to become like a facilitator for the student congress and also a lot of other related leadership developmental opportunities that look freaking beefy on my resume as I tried to apply for future stuff. So it really helped to have that laid out for you because you're given more opportunities if you are given sort of like that leadership position in your CCA. And when I moved on to, let's say, university, even when I'm applying for certain things like, a bit scholarships, or even applying for things like overseas volunteering programs, what they're looking out for is not somebody that's boring, that constantly marked and did very well in school. They're looking for somebody with a passion, with sort of like that identity in them, where they sort of have like the whole idea of like they have a lot of energy and they are trying to go out there to get things done. So I think having that impression works throughout life. The very fact that you're out there, you're a hustler and you're getting things done, that's sort of like the value of CCA. Like I mentioned earlier, there is no bonus point here, but at this point in your life, when you're 17 years old, 18 years old, what you should be looking for is more of to establish that personal growth, or to sort of develop that personal identity that I think it can't be truly brought out just through academics. You have to find an external way of doing it. But let's say if your interest is in something like, let's say, animation, okay? You really love to do animation, but that's not a CCA in JC. What you can consider is really just to take a CCA that you might not enjoy as much, but to devote that time into something that you're passionate about. So I'm not so much fixated on the word CCA here, but I'm more fixated on developing something that defines you, to find your passion in life. Because finding that spark and that passion would really help you decide what course you want to do in university even. So a big problem that students face, right, is like, you don't know what to do. Okay, you go JC, never mind. After the 2 years, right, you get your A-level results. You're like, yes, I did well. Or maybe you didn't do well. Doesn't really matter. But then you don't even know what you want to do in the next stage of your life. Because by that point in time, you had just been studying so hard. You never really took the time to go and understand yourself or to discover your own identity. So I think the value in developing your self-identity early, possibly through CCA, can really help to troubleshoot making the wrong choices down the road. So for myself, I chose a course that I liked. So I really enjoyed my 4 years. But I've seen many friends in university that hated what they're studying. But I think it all boils down to whether you knew yourself enough, and whether you gave yourself the opportunity to grow in that sense. To that, what's your opinion on it, Iman?
I agree. I agree with the hustle part especially. I think it's very, very important. So I don't know, like I feel like I really developed myself and the work ethic during JC. So if it transposes like itself everywhere through to life lah. So everything that I do, I really bring that same attitude, and I feel that I really developed and honed this aspect of me only in JC, not in secondary school even. So I think if you have the opportunity to push yourself and make it a habit, then just do it lah. You won't regret one. From my experience, I can say that I've never regretted working hard. I've only regretted slacking. So I'm trying my best not to regret. But that being said, also keep your sanity lah. And there are very important things in life also along the way. So while you're trying to balance your academics with your CCA, try not to ignore the precious times that you have with your family also lah. I think a lot of people don't really talk about that much. But as you start to grow and age, you realize that family is everything. So just wanted to add that in also as a very, very wholesome segue. So I hope you guys also take that into consideration lah. Important, cherish the people around you, and that also includes your friends in JC. Yeah.
Maybe I also want to add, right, that having a CCA in JC provides you another layer of friends that you can have. Because if you don't have a CCA, then your social circle is sort of limited to your classmates. And in terms of your CCA, you are essentially going through shared experiences and having a shared interest, which means that the chances of finding people that are similar to you is actually much higher than your classmates. So yeah, I think I have made very, very good friends through CCA, which is also one of the reasons why I enjoyed it so much. Because even if training is difficult and all, you know that, okay, I'm going to go CCA, I'm going to see people that I enjoy being with, and that's enough for me. Yep, and I also agree with Darrell on like forming of your identity. I think one of the main things in forming identity, right, is going through crisis. Like the tough times will really show you who you are. And you go through many tough times in your educational journey and also through CCA.
Okay, I think this has been a pretty wholesome episode, and we really gave you the spectrum of perspective on should you have a CCA, should you stick to your CCA, or should you try something new. I think we all have slightly differing opinions on it, but I think we can all agree that the consensus is try to get a CCA and to join something that you will actually help yourself grow, and we all advocate for it. So if you're considering, our advice is go for it, do something that you like. Other than that, I think I think it's been a pretty wholesome episode, so we'll just end it off here. So thank you for tuning in, and you haven't subscribed and followed us on Spotify, please do, as we will look to bring you more exciting content. And that will be all for this podcast.
It sound right, boy.